Okay, so we're going to start by talking about MLA format. So we're going a little bit backwards today. We're going to talk about how to format your sources and use them in your paper once you already have them. And then we'll go back to how to find sources using the databases and how to assess your sources to know whether or not they are reliable for use in an academic essay. So before I get started with MLA, how many of you, this looks familiar to you, you've written a paper in this format before? Okay, so like a good half of you. So for those of you that are not familiar with MLA, I'm just going to show you the basic setup for a paper in MLA format. And this format stands for Modern Language Association. It's going to be the style that your English and humanities and history courses use. So the first thing you want to do is put your name. So let's say your name is Jane Smith. Put your name, and then you put your professor's name. So we'll put Professor Egan, and then the name of the class. So let's say you're in English 1302, section 115. Put that. And then you put today's date, like 20 March 2019, no commas. Then you just skip to the next line and you put your title. So somebody give me a title. I think doing creative titles is important. I don't like to see people call things Essay 1 or Gun Violence Essay. Like, what are you saying about the topic? Someone give me a title you did recently. What about it?
It's about this little girl who's having a self matches.
What were you saying about it?
And that's the title is.
But what was your essay arguing?
Oh, it was about the beauty within death.
Okay. Yes, that's perfect. Okay. So you could have your title something like The Beauty Within Death in The Little Match Girl, and it's a short story?
Yes, and I put finding the beauty in, because when you read it, a lot of people think that it's sad.
Okay, and who is the author's name? You know?
Han Christensen Andersen.
Okay, perfect. So you have your title. Much better than just saying Essay 1, right? Or The Little Match Girl, right? The title should suggest something about what your argument is going to say. We make sure it's all double spaced. And then you hit enter one time, go back to your left-hand margins, hit tab one time, and then your essay starts here. And you also need what's called a header. So the heading, this thing, appears only on page 1, and your header is going to be on every page. So you go insert, page number, top of page, plain number 3, and then your last name and one space. Highlight it, make sure it's in Times New Roman 12, and then you double click to get out of it. And you'll notice that your header is then going to appear on every single page. A lot of students make the mistake of putting in like their last name and the number 1 on the first page, and then they're confused why the number 1 appears on every single page. It's because you did not give Word the command to put the page number in.
So you don't center the title?
You do.
You do, okay.
This one's just super long.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so that is your basic setup. Easy enough, right? In the handout I gave you, you guys see an example of section headings, and this is an optional thing, so you can use section headings. You can also choose not to. If you do use them, you have two different options. You can use numbers to do them, or you can use levels to do them. So levels means how far the heading is indented. So in that sample paper you guys have, what are they using? Numbers or they're using numbers or levels. Levels, yeah, they're unnumbered, so you can see like the directions for how each one has to be, right? In-text citations correspond to the works cited page. This is the most important thing I can tell you about not just MLA format, but APA format or any formatting system you are using. The in-text citation is married to the citation that appears on the works cited page. So that means you have to be able to look at the in-text citation and easily find it within the works cited page. I was grading a paper 2 days ago where the student just put in everything that should have been on the works cited page right into the middle of the essay. They did it a couple times and then they just had these whole huge hyperlinks within the essay. You don't want to be that person that looks sloppy and slows your reader down. So in this sample paper you guys have, you can see an example of an in-text citation. Check out like page 3 of the sample essay. So it's page 4 in your packet. You have an in-text citation that just says Danoff 7. So somebody go to your works cited page and tell me what kind of source is the Danoff source. What do we know about it?
It's an article. Like a journal.
Is it a journal article or it is scholarly? I heard it. A book. How do you know? Title of the book is in italics, right? So who is responsible for the information in the book? Who?
Harvard?
Yes, Harvard University Press. So UP stands for University Press. I don't have extras of that, so if you guys want to share in the back. Italics for book titles because it's the name of a larger container. Okay, so in MLA, all of your larger containers are going to go in italics. Anything that's a part of that larger container goes in quotation marks. That's whether you are doing a works cited page or referring to the source in your paper. So if you have the title of a journal publication, a book, a newspaper, what are those going to go in? Italics. If you have the title of a journal article, a newspaper article, a song title, the name of a short story, what do those go in? Quotation marks. Not underline, don't put them in nothing. So just remember, smaller parts, quotation marks, larger containers, italics. So name of a song would be what?
Quotes.
Quotes. Name of an album, like the name of a whole CD. Italics. Or you guys don't have CDs anymore, but you know what I mean. Okay. This is a good point to say that when you're introducing your sources, right? No one knows usually who a source is by name unless they are someone recognizable, right? Like if you have a public figure, John McCain, Hillary Clinton, everyone knows who that is pretty much, right? If you're just giving the name of a journalist before the quote, that's not going to give your audience any, recognition, right? If I just said, according to an article by Emily Steele, you guys don't know who that is, right? And neither does your audience. So it's more effective to introduce your source use with something like, according to an article that appeared in the New York Times, right? Because everyone knows, the New York Times is a reliable news source. So then your reader automatically is going to give weight to the quote that you are about to use because they know where it came from. Does that make sense? So again, when you do that introduction, according to an article in the New York Times, you put the New York Times in what? Italics. Quotations if you're going to give the title of the exact article. Yeah. All right, so in-text citations are married to the works cited page. You must use an in-text citation no matter what, wherever you give an exact word-for-word quote, paraphrase from a source, or summarize from a source. What is the difference between a paraphrase or a summary and a word-for-word quote?
Paraphrases in your own words.
Yeah, paraphrases in your own words. Be careful. Like my students in Comp 2 right now, they have an assignment to do annotations for every source they are using in their essay. The first job of their annotation is to summarize the source, right? If I have an article in front of me and I'm looking at it and typing my summary, it's so easy to take a section of like 3 or 4 words right out of the article, put it into my summary, and then forget to cite it. Forget that it's a direct quote, right? So I always tell my students, try taking the article, put it face down, or whatever you're trying to summarize, and that's how you know what you're writing is in your own words. If you have something out in front of you and you're looking at that when you're trying to give a summary or a paraphrase, you have to be really meticulous about then providing the quotation marks around the exact quote, right? So anytime you do a paraphrase or a summary, even though it's not a direct quote, you also need the in-text citation. You have to give citations for information that is considered not common knowledge. So if you're going to talk about things that happened outside of your lifetime with any kind of specific detail, you need a source reference. If you're going to give an obvious piece of information everybody knows, then you don't have to worry about it so much. For example, it's common knowledge that the Challenger was a spaceship that exploded, right? You don't need to cite that information. But if you say when it happened, like April 1986, or you talk about how many people were killed when it happened, or what NASA's reaction to it was like, or what the public's reaction to it was like, then you need a citation. Does that make sense? You can say that America was involved in a civil war without having to cite it. But as soon as you start talking about the dates, how long it lasted, how many people were killed, you want to give some statistic like this war killed more people than all subsequent wars combined, like any specific information like that, you've got to put a citation there, even if it's in your own words. Make sense? Okay, so they give you some examples here of in-text citations. If you introduce the author directly before giving the quote, all you need there is the page number. If you do not, then you need both the author's last name and the page number. If you are familiar with APA format, a lot of times APA format is what is used by these academic journal articles that people are finding. And a big mistake I'll see students make is they'll just, copy and paste the quote from the journal article into their paper, but they leave the APA citations within their paper. So APA format doesn't use page numbers except for direct quotes. They use years. MLA uses page numbers always, even if you're paraphrasing or summarizing. So they give you a couple of examples. Wordsworth stated that romantic poetry was marked by a, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, 263. Or, romantic poetry is characterized by the, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, Wordsworth, 263. Even though we're only using spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, 5 words, we still have to put quotation marks around it because we did not come up with that phrase. Does that make sense? So these citations that are in text, right? Those link back to the works cited page. So this is what would appear on the works cited page. So if you saw that works cited entry, what could you then tell me about that source? What kind of source is it? It's a book. How do you know?
Title.
Yeah, the title's in italics. If the first title we get is in quotation marks, That shows us it's an article that's a part of something bigger, right? Like a newspaper or a journal. So the fact that we get the title in italics first, that shows us that it's a book, plus we know it's published by Oxford University Press, right? And we have the year that it was published. Okay, so here's another example. They give you a works cited page citation for something by Kenneth Burke, right? And then they give you two examples of how the in-text citation might look. Humans have been described by Kenneth Burke as, quote, symbol-using animals, end quote, page 3, or humans have been described as symbol-using animals, end quote, Burke, 3. You'll notice period. I don't know if you guys can see well here, but period always goes after citation only. No need to put it both before and after, just after the citation only. Based on what I've just told you guys earlier, which example do you think I would prefer?
Second one.
Why?
You already have the reference in your cited page, so you can.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be able to go back easily and see this is a book, right, by University of California Press. Do you guys know who Kenneth Burke is? So I would either do the second example, just humans have been described as, give the quote, cite it so that they can find it for themselves, or I would introduce the source as, according to the book, Language as Symbolic Action, Essays on Life, Literature, and Method, and I would put that book title in what? Italics, so everyone would know it was a book. And then I would give the quote, right? Humans have been described as, quote, symbol-using animals, end quote, and then Burke 3. Yeah? Okay, before we even go into this stuff, look at the sample paper that I gave you guys, the works cited page. What do you notice about, all the lines after the first are indented, right? So why do you think that is?
So you can find who wrote it easily?
Yeah, you can easily find who wrote the information. How are the sources ordered in there?
Alphabetical.
Alphabetical according to the first listed author's last name, right? That is for a reason, right? Because the in-text citation always corresponds directly to what's on your works cited page. So if I don't have an author, I have to start with the next piece of information, which is the title. And that means my in-text citation has to correspond to the title. So on this page, you get an example, right? The Historical Census Browser from the University of Virginia Library in 2007. It's a website. What would my in-text citation look like if I used that source? And I don't have a page number because it's just online. So what would my parenthetical be? You want to correspond back to that title, right? So what you're going to do in the event that you don't have an author, just put the title in quotation marks and the page number if you have it. If you don't have it, you would just leave it off. So like for that source, you would just put Historical Census Browser in quotation marks within the parentheses. Does this make sense? Now to introduce this source, if I was writing the paper, I would probably say something like, according to the University of Virginia Library, give the information and then give the citation. Again, that's so that my reader knows that that source use is reliable. Okay, so there's no known author. And then they give you the corresponding entry in the works cited page. Okay, short prose quotations. So same thing, if you introduce the author then you only have to give the page number. If you do not introduce the author first, you have to give the author and the page number in the in-text citation. They just give you guys a couple of examples, like if your quote is asking a question, instead of putting a period here, you put a question mark. I know it looks a little funny. And if you are giving the quote in the middle of the sentence, you put the in-text citation in the middle of the sentence. So, according to some dreams express, quote, profound aspects of personality, citation, though others disagree. Right? And this source use style, introduce the source, give the quote, cite the source, and then give some kind of explanation, is a good thing to keep in mind whenever you use sources. It doesn't matter if the explanation comes in another separate sentence or within the same sentence, but you want to point out to the reader, like, what do you want them to see from that source use? Never let the reader interpret the source use on their own. They may not see it the same way you do. Say you are trying to make the argument that teachers spend too much time in the classroom focused on standardized test prep, and you say something like, a study recently revealed that 40% of classroom hours are spent on exam prep. If you don't interpret that for the reader, they might just be like, great, 60% isn't. That sounds wonderful, right? You have to step in and provide interpretation. Like, obviously, arts classes and elective classes don't do exam prep. So part of that 60% is just courses where it can't exist anyway, right? So it's really taking up an even larger portion of classroom time. You might also want to compare it to the percentage of classroom time exam prep took 10 years ago, and then highlight the differences between that, right? Then maybe you want to look up a study about anxiety experienced by children as young as 4th grade, right? Compare that data from 10 years ago versus now. The anxiety children feel about academic performance. If it's increased, and then the time you spend preparing for standardized tests has also increased, then you can start to use your evidence to draw conclusions, right, that are based on evidence and facts, right, not just your own assumptions. So, okay, just a few more in-text examples. If you have more than 4 lines of prose, you're going to do what's called a block quote. I don't like this slide because, as you can see, some of the spacing is weird. So let me just show you on a Microsoft Word document how a block quote would look. Okay, so if you are typing, you might introduce the quote. So let's see if I can just, in fact, copy this. That would be nice. Okay, I can. Perfect. So I can fix it for you. All right, let's put it in 12-point font. This is another thing. If you're ever going to take information out of sources to copy it in, and you're going to put it in direct quotation marks, that's okay. But make sure that you come in and fix the colors and fix the font size and the font. You've got to make it all match. Don't just leave it sloppily pasted. Okay. So this is actually about my favorite book, Wuthering Heights. Nellie Dean treats Heathcliff poorly and dehumanizes him throughout her narration. And then this is all the quote, right? So what you're going to do is you're taking the direct quote out of quotation marks. It's the only time you're allowed to do that. And then you're indenting every line of the quote 1 tab. And then you're following it up with the in-text citation. And then when you go to explain it, okay. This represents Nellie's belief that Heathcliff's social status undermines his humanity, whatever you want to say about it. I'm just making this up. But the point I want to show you is how you go back to the normal margins. Don't indent here, because then that's like you're starting a new paragraph, right? So this is the block quote, and you're going to make sure all of this is double spaced. And I always tell it not to add space between paragraphs of the same style. There we go. So that's how the block quote would look in your essay. Again, the only time that you're going to take a direct quote and not put it in quotation marks, because by indenting every line one tab, you are showing the reader, hey, this is a direct word-for-word quote. In APA format, the rule for this, by the way, is more than, if it takes up more than 40 words. In MLA, the rule is more than 4 lines. So how do you know if it takes up more than 4 lines? You just literally have to count. So if we put these margins as normal, we can see it takes up 1, 2, 3, 4, over 4. That's why we have to do this, right? Just a hint for those of you writing in APA format, I once saw a student counting, and I came over to the computer and I was like, what are you doing? And they were like, I'm trying to see if I need a block quote for APA. And I highlighted the quote for them, and see how it says 91 of 141 words? They were like, oh, you just saved me so much time. So you don't have to ever count. If you want to know like how long part of your paper is, just highlight the part that is in question. It'll tell you down here. Okay. Almost done, I promise. All right, so that's block quote. If you're quoting poetry, this is just for my lit students that may be in the room, you put a dash between lines of poetry, just like this. Authors, for last name is always listed first, followed by a comma and the rest of the name. If you have 2 authors or 3 authors, you're going to list them too, but only the first listed author gets the last name, comma, first name treatment. So if you have Jane Smith, Howard Marks, and Jennifer Harris, it's going to be Smith, comma, Jane, comma, Howard Marks, comma, and Jennifer Harris. And then your in-text citation would list all 3 of them. Once you have more than 3 authors, that's when you move to the et al., which means basically and everyone else. Okay, so your components of your citations, you always have the author, you have the title of the source. Remember, books and websites or bigger things get put in italics. Smaller parts get put in quotation marks. So like in this example, you have an article from the Georgia Review, right? So the article title is in quotes, and then the name of the publication is in italics. In this next example, they give you an episode of the show Pretty Little Liars, so the episode name is in quotes. The title of the show is in italics. You need other contributors sometimes. Those are always going to come after the author who's listed. So like with my lit students, I have the hardest time with them getting them to cite the authors of the short story or the poem or the essay or the play. They always want to cite it as Belasco and Johnson, who are the editors of the textbook. Belasco and Johnson were not even alive when some of this stuff was written. So give the authors their credit first, and then you say later who translated it or who edited it or who created it or who did an introduction to the text. Versions, whether you're using an edition or let's say you have a director's cut version of a movie, that's going to go after your other contributors if you have them. Numbers are important, so we do volume and then VOL for volume and NO for number in MLA. You can also note if something is from a season or an episode. And then your publisher, that's who's responsible for the information. So like Oxford University Press, 20th Century Fox, as is the case for like the TV show or the movie. If you have something from a museum of art, you want to say where it is, like just saying the Modern Museum of Art. There could be more than one, so you want to specify New York, Pittsburgh, wherever we're talking about. Publication date, if they tell you the season and the year, put them both. If you just have the year, put that. If you have an exact date, put that. So if it says 20th of March, 2019, you give all of that. And then location, we talked about this, you know, you need to give the exact link or the exact page numbers or like the location of the museum if you're talking about a piece from there. All right, that's all I got for you guys.